You want to know about the balloons, the observation balloons we went up in? Most people don't even know we existed. They remember the pilots, the aces with their scarves and their Fokkers and Sopwiths. Nobody remembers the men who went up in the sausages, dangling there like bait on a line, watching the world burn below us. I was 23 when I volunteered for balloon observation duty in early 1917. That seems like someone else's life now. Another man entirely. I'd been in the artillery since 15, a forward observation officer calling in coordinates from trenches and shell holes. Good at mathematics, they said. Sharp eyes. That's what got me selected. That and being stupid enough to say yes when they asked if I was afraid of heights. I told them no. First lie of many. They shipped me to a training facility near Rouen in March of 17. The balloons were massive things up close, these great hydrogen-filled beasts we called sausages because of their shape. 70 feet long, 30 feet across, bright yellow or sometimes silver, depending on what the brass thought would make us less of a target. As if color mattered when you're the only thing in the sky that can't move. We called them observation balloons, but their real name was Drachen, or kite balloons. The Germans had their own versions, and we'd spot them across no man's land, hanging there like us, watching like us. Sometimes I wondered about the poor bastard in that German basket, whether he knew that some days the only reason I didn't call in artillery on his position was because I understood. We were the same, him and me. Same cage, different flag. The training was simple enough. Learn to use the field telephone, memorize the grid coordinates, practice with the maps and binoculars. Learn to read the landscape from above, to spot the muzzle flash of a German battery, to see the patterns in the mud that meant fresh trenches or troop movements. But the real training was something they couldn't teach you in a classroom. It was learning to climb into that wicker basket, knowing you might not climb out. It was learning to watch the sky constantly, always scanning for the fighters that hunted us. It was learning to wear a parachute and trust that if the balloon caught fire, you'd have maybe 10 seconds to jump before the whole thing became your crematorium. They gave us parachutes, you see. That was supposed to be a comfort. The pilots didn't even have those until later in the war. But I'd seen what happened when a balloon caught fire. Hydrogen burns fast and hot. Sometimes the men didn't even have time to scream. My first ascent was April 12th, 1917. I remember the date because it was my sister's birthday back in Manchester. I thought about her as they winched us up, thought about the cake she'd have, the candles, the normal world that seemed to be disappearing below me with every turn of the winch. The basket swayed. That's what I remember most. The constant swaying, like being drunk but without any of the pleasant parts. 2,000 feet up, sometimes 3,000. And that basket just swaying in the wind while you tried to hold the binoculars steady and read the coordinates off the map. But the view, God, the view. You could see everything from up there. The whole war laid out like a map, only it was real. The trenches cutting across the landscape like scars, the shell holes pockmarking the earth, the villages that used to be villages, now just rubble and broken walls, and everywhere, the mud. I thought I'd understood the war from the trenches. I understood nothing. From up there, you could see it wasn't about territory or glory or any of the things they told us when we enlisted. It was about feeding men into a machine. That's all. Just feeding more men into the grinding machine and hoping your side had more men to feed than the other side. My observer partner that first week was a fellow named Davies, a Welshman who'd been up in the balloons since 16. He had that look in his eyes, the one I'd later see in my own mirror, the one that said he'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it. Don't get attached to the balloon, he told me that first day. And don't get attached to your observer partner either. We don't last long up here. He was dead 3 days later, shot down by an albatross that came out of the sun. I watched the balloon catch fire, watched him jump. The parachute opened, but the German pilot made another pass. I saw the traces hit Davies before he was halfway down. That's when I learned the real job. We weren't just there to spot artillery and call in coordinates. We were there to die in the sky so everyone below could see what happened when you went up in the balloons. We were there to burn. They assigned me a new observer partner within hours, a kid named Peters from somewhere in Kent, 19 years old and terrified, though he tried to hide it. I was 23 and already felt ancient. We went up the next morning at dawn. That was when they preferred to send us up, when the light was good for spotting, but before the German fighters got too active, as if there was ever a safe time. The winch crew hauled us up hand over hand, the cable groaning with our weight. The basket swayed and bounced as we rose. Peters gripped the edge so hard his knuckles went white. I wanted to tell him it got easier, but that would have been a lie. It never got easier. At 1,500 feet, you could start to make out the details. The British trenches, the German trenches, the wasteland between. At 2,000 feet, you could see for miles in every direction. Our job was to watch the German lines, spot their artillery positions, call in coordinates to our own batteries. The telephone line ran down the tether cable to the ground crew. You'd crank the handle, wait for the connection, then relay what you saw. Grid reference Delta 743. Suspected battery position. Request ranging shot. Then you'd wait. Watch through the binoculars. See the shell land. Calculate the adjustment needed. Up 200 yards. Left 50. Again and again until you found the range. Then the real bombardment would begin. I got good at it. Too good. By May, I could calculate adjustments in my head, could read the landscape like a book. I knew where the Germans would place their guns, where they'd dig their supply trenches, where they'd concentrate their troops before an attack. And I'd call down death on them. The telephone made it abstract, you see. Just numbers and grid references and technical language. You didn't think about the men you were killing. You couldn't, or you'd never crank that handle again. But sometimes the wind would shift and you'd hear it. The screams carrying across no man's land. Then you'd know. Then you couldn't pretend it was just mathematics anymore. Peters lasted 2 weeks. We were up on May 23rd when 3 Albatross fighters came at us out of the clouds. They were hunting, the way they always hunted. The German pilots loved shooting down balloons. Easy targets, they called us. Flaming coffins. I saw them first, shouted at Peters. We both grabbed for the parachute rip cords, but by then they were on us. The first burst of machine gun fire tore through the balloon envelope. I could hear the hydrogen hissing out, could smell it. The second burst hit the basket. Peters jerked like he'd been punched. When he turned to look at me, there was a hole in his chest the size of my fist. He tried to say something. Couldn't. Just looked confused. Then the balloon caught fire. I went over the side without thinking, pulled the ripcord as I fell. The parachute opened with a crack that nearly broke my shoulders. Above me, the balloon was a ball of orange flame, and Peters was still in the basket. Still in the basket. I heard him screaming as I drifted down. Heard it until I didn't anymore. The German fighters circled like sharks. I hung there in my parachute harness, completely helpless, waiting for them to make another pass, waiting to feel the bullets tear through me like they'd torn through Peters. But they didn't shoot. One of them flew close enough that I could see the pilot's face, see him looking at me. Then they turned away, headed back to their own lines. Maybe they thought I'd suffered enough. Maybe they had rules about shooting men in parachutes. Or maybe they just wanted me to live so I could go back up again, so they could hunt me again another day. I landed in no man's land, about 50 yards from our forward trench. Spent 2 hours crawling back while shells landed around me. When I finally tumbled into the trench, I couldn't stop shaking. Couldn't stop seeing Peter's face. that confused look before the fire took him. They sent me back up the next morning. You want to know what it was really like up there? Day after day, week after week. It was terror and boredom in equal measure. Long hours of scanning the horizon, watching for movement, for muzzle flashes, for anything that might be worth reporting. Your eyes would start to ache from the constant strain. Your neck would cramp from holding the binoculars steady. And all the while, that basket swaying, never still. But the terror was always there, just beneath the surface. Because you knew. Every man who went up in the balloons knew. We were sitting ducks. The balloons couldn't maneuver, couldn't dodge, couldn't fight back. We just hung there in the sky, bright and obvious, while German fighters hunted us. They'd come out of the sun where you couldn't see them until it was too late. Or they'd hide in the clouds and drop down on you like hawks on a rabbit. The parachute was supposed to save you. That's what they told us during training. If the balloon catches fire, you jump, you pull the cord, you float down to safety. They didn't tell you about the ones who jumped too late, who burned before they could clear the basket. They didn't tell you about the parachutes that didn't open, or opened tangled, or got caught on the burning balloon. They didn't tell you that sometimes the German fighters would shoot you while you hung there helpless in your harness, drifting down. And they didn't tell you that even if you made it down alive, even if everything went right, you'd still have to go back up the next day. I went through 6 observer partners between May and September of 1917. 6. Thompson lasted 3 days before a fighter got our balloon. We both jumped. His parachute didn't open. I watched him fall, tumbling over and over, arms and legs flailing. He hit the ground 200 yards from our lines. They told me later he was still alive when they reached him. Not for long. Ashworth made it through July before shrapnel from an anti-aircraft shell tore through his leg, severed the artery. He bled out in the basket while I tried to stop it with my hands, tried to hold the pieces of him together. We were 1,000 feet up. By the time they winched us down, he was already cold. Collins went mad, just broke. We were up during an attack in August, watching the German shells land on our trenches, watching the men scatter like ants. He started laughing, couldn't stop. When we got down, he was still laughing. They took him away, and I never saw him again. The others blur together now. Different faces, same fate. All of them dead or broken, and me still alive, still going up day after day. By September, I'd stopped learning their names. What was the point? The Germans called us Ballonvernichtungskommando targets, balloon destruction targets. They assigned their best pilots to hunt us. Aces like Hermann Goering and Karl Degelow made their names shooting down observation balloons. Every balloon they killed was another victory mark on their aircraft, another story to tell over drinks. We were their sport, their practice targets, and there was nothing we could do about it. The worst part wasn't the attacks, though. The worst part was the waiting. Hanging there hour after hour, scanning the sky, knowing that any second could be your last. Your stomach in knots, your hands shaking so bad you could barely hold the binoculars steady, every sound making you flinch, every shadow in the clouds making your heart race. And still you had to do your job. Still you had to watch the German lines, spot their batteries, call in the coordinates. Still you had to be precise, professional, efficient, as if your hands weren't shaking, as if you weren't screaming inside. I started having trouble sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I'd see Peters burning, Thompson falling, Ashworth's blood on my hands. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was in the basket and the balloon was on fire. The doctors gave me pills. They didn't help. Nothing helped. You'd think you'd get used to it eventually, that the fear would dull with repetition, that you'd become numb to it. But it doesn't work that way. Every time was worse than the last. Every time you climbed into that basket, you were more aware of what could happen. Your imagination would show you all the ways you could die over and over until you couldn't think about anything else. But you climbed in anyway, because that was your job, because the war needed eyes in the sky, because refusing meant a court-martial and a firing squad. So you climbed in, you went up, and you waited to die. Some days I thought the firing squad would be easier. October 1917, Passchendaele. If you want to know what hell looks like, it looks like Passchendaele from 2,000 feet up. The mud stretched in every direction, thick and gray and endless. Men disappeared into it, swallowed whole. Tanks sank in it. Horses drowned in it. The mud became a living thing, hungry and patient. From up in the balloon, I could see the offensive unfold day by day. The artillery barrages that churned the earth into soup. The men going over the top, advancing in lines that dissolved into scattered individuals, then into nothing. The German counterattacks, the whole cycle repeating day after day for gains measured in yards. I'd call in the coordinates, watch the shells land, watch men die, then do it again. They rotated us back every 2 weeks for what they called rest, as if 2 weeks away from the balloon could erase what you'd seen from up there, as if sleep could cure what was wrong with us. During one of these rests, I went to a pub in a village 10 miles behind the lines. Needed to get drunk, needed to forget, even if just for a few hours. There were infantry there, men from the trenches, and they were laughing and drinking and telling stories about close calls and narrow escapes. One of them saw my balloon observer insignia, asked me about it. "Must be nice," he said, "getting to stay out of the mud. Safe up there in your balloon." Safe. He thought we were safe. I didn't hit him, though part of me wanted to. Instead, I just finished my drink and left. What would have been the point in explaining? He'd lived in the trenches, seen his own version of hell. He couldn't understand mine any more than I could truly understand his. We all had our own nightmares. Mine just happened at altitude. By November, I'd been up in the balloons for 8 months. I was one of the senior observers now, which really just meant I'd survived longer than most. They started using me to train the new men, to teach them the grid references and spotting techniques and how to read the landscape from above. I'd look at these fresh-faced kids, eager and nervous and so damn young, and I'd want to tell them the truth, want to tell them to run, to fake an illness, to do anything but climb into that basket. But I didn't. I just taught them what they needed to know and tried not to think about how many of them would be dead within a week. One of them, a boy named Harris from Liverpool, asked me if I was scared. Every single time, I told him. And if you're smart, you will be too. The ones who aren't scared, the ones who think they're invincible, they're the ones who die first. Harris lasted 4 days. The weather got worse as winter came on. The cold at altitude was brutal, cutting through every layer of clothing, numbing your fingers until you could barely work the telephone. The wind picked up, making the basket sway worse than ever, making it nearly impossible to hold the binoculars steady. But we still went up. The war didn't stop for weather. December 15th, 1917. I remember because it was my birthday, 24 years old, though I felt 50. They sent me up with a new observer named Young. The irony of his name wasn't lost on either of us. We were at 2,200 feet when I saw them. 3 Fokker triplanes coming fast from the northeast. The Red Baron's flying circus, we called them. Though I don't know if it was actually his squadron or just one like it. I shouted at Young to get ready to jump. We both had our hands on the ripcords, watching those planes get closer, waiting for the inevitable. But they flew past us, didn't fire a shot, just flew past and disappeared into the clouds to the south. Young was shaking. "Why didn't they shoot?" he asked. "Why didn't they attack?" "I don't know," I said, and I didn't. Maybe they were out of ammunition. Maybe they had orders to attack something else. Maybe one of their pilots had a birthday too and decided to let us live, or maybe they just wanted us to suffer a bit longer. Young didn't come back after that day. Went to the medical officer, said he couldn't do it anymore. Last I heard, they sent him to a psychiatric hospital in England. One of the lucky ones, I suppose. They paired me with a veteran observer after that, a Scotsman named MacLeod, who'd been up even longer than I had. We didn't talk much, didn't need to. We both understood. We just went up, did our job, came down, day after day after day, waiting for the day we wouldn't come down. March 1918, the German spring offensive. They hit us with everything they had. Operation Michael, they called it. The last great German push, their final attempt to win the war before the Americans arrived in force. From the balloon, I watched it unfold like watching the end of the world. The artillery barrage started before dawn on March 21st. I'd never seen anything like it, and I'd seen plenty. Thousands of guns firing at once, the flashes lighting up the horizon like a continuous lightning storm. The ground disappeared beneath smoke and fire. You could feel the concussions in the air, even 2,000 feet up. Then came the infantry. Wave after wave of German soldiers advancing through the fog and smoke. Our lines broke. I could see them breaking, see the men running, see the German troops pouring through the gaps. And I called in coordinates, tried to slow them down, tried to hit their supply lines, their reserves, anything. But there were too many, too many. MacLeod and I stayed up for 8 hours that day. They kept winching us down just long enough to refuel, to get new map sheets, then right back up. My eyes burned from the smoke and the strain. My voice was hoarse from shouting coordinates into the telephone over the noise. But the Germans kept coming. We lost 3 balloons that day to fighters, just in our sector alone. I watched them burn, watched the men jump, watched some of them not make it. By evening, there were only 2 balloons left where there had been 6 that morning. The next day was worse. We went up at dawn and stayed up until nearly dark. The German advance was continuing, pushing deeper into our lines. Villages we'd held for years were being overrun. Artillery positions we'd defended were being abandoned. Everything was chaos. And still we hung there in our basket, calling down what fire we could, watching it all fall apart. That's when I realized we were going to lose. All of it. The years of fighting, the millions dead, the whole bloody war. We were going to lose it all. Something broke in me that day. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just a quiet crack, like ice giving way beneath your feet. I stopped caring whether we lived or died up there. Stopped scanning the sky for fighters. Stopped flinching at every sound. It all seemed so pointless suddenly. We were specks of dust in a storm, pretending we mattered. MacLeod noticed. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," I said. It was the truth. I felt fine. Felt nothing at all. We went up again on March 23rd. A Fokker came at us out of the sun just after noon. I saw it coming. Had time to grab the ripcord, time to jump. I didn't. I just stood there and watched it come. Watched the pilot line up his shot. Watched the muzzle flashes start. MacLeod hit me. Actually hit me. Knocked me sideways, grabbed me, and threw us both over the side of the basket as the bullets tore through where I'd been standing. The balloon exploded above us as we fell. I pulled my ripcord automatically without thinking. The parachute opened. MacLeod's opened beside me. We landed in a shell crater and stayed there until dark. Not talking, just breathing. My ears were ringing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt calm, perfectly calm. That scared me more than anything that had happened before. They pulled me off balloon duty after that. Sent me to see a doctor who asked questions I couldn't answer and wrote things in a file I couldn't read. They gave me a week's leave, told me to rest. But there was no rest. Not anymore. Not for me. I'd stood there and waited for death. Welcomed it. And some part of me was angry that MacLeod had saved me. Angry that I was still alive when Peters and Thompson and Ashworth and Harris and all the others weren't. Why me? Why did I get to survive when they didn't? I never found an answer to that question. They sent me back up in April. Different balloon, different sector. McLeod was gone, transferred somewhere. No one would tell me where. My new observer partner was another kid who wouldn't last long. But something had changed in me. The fear was still there, but it was distant now, separate. I could watch myself be afraid without really feeling it, like I was observing my own life from a great height. The balloon observer who stood in that basket, who called in coordinates and watched men die, who flinched at every shadow in the sky, that wasn't really me anymore. He was someone else, someone I was pretending to be. The real me, whoever that was, had stayed behind in that shell crater with McLeod, or maybe had burned with Peters back in May, or maybe had never made it back from that first ascent. I stayed up there until the armistice, November 11th, 1918. When they told us the war was over, I was at altitude, watching the front lines through my binoculars. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, gradually, the guns fell silent. The silence was louder than the shelling had been. They winched us down for the last time that afternoon. When I climbed out of the basket, my legs nearly gave out. I'd spent so many hours in that thing, my body had forgotten how to stand on solid ground. They sent us home within weeks, gave us our discharge papers, some back pay, a handshake. That was it. 3 years of watching hell from above, and they sent us back to the world like nothing had happened. Manchester was the same. The streets, the buildings, my sister's house, all the same. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still up there somehow, still dangling 2,000 feet above the earth, still swaying in that basket. I got a job at an accounting firm, used my mathematics just like in the war. Different numbers, same calculations, but sometimes I'd be adding up columns of figures and I'd see grid references instead, see coordinates, hear the telephone crackling in my ear. The nightmares never stopped. I still dream about the balloons, still feel the basket swaying, still see Peters burning, Thompson falling, Ashworth bleeding, still see that Fokker coming out of the sun while I stood there and waited for it. My wife, I married in 1921, she tries to understand. But how can she? How can anyone who wasn't there? I can't explain to her why I flinch at loud noises, why I can't stand having my back to open spaces, why I sometimes go quiet for hours and can't tell her why. She doesn't know that when I look at her, sometimes I see the distance in feet instead of inches. 2,200 feet. The height at which people look like ants. The height at which you can watch them die and pretend they're just numbers on a map. People ask me about the war sometimes. They want stories about bravery, about adventure. They don't want to hear about the fear. They don't want to hear about standing in a wicker basket while the world burned below you and German fighters hunted you like sport. They especially don't want to hear that I'm still up there, still in that balloon, that I never really came down. The boy who volunteered in 1917, who thought he'd serve his country and come home a hero, he died up there somewhere, burned or fell or just dissolved into the thin air at altitude. What came back, what's writing this now, is something else. A ghost wearing the shape of a man, trying to remember what it felt like to be human. I look at photographs from before the war sometimes. There's one of me at 22, smiling, arm around my sister. I don't recognize that person. Don't remember what it felt like to be him. The doctors have a name for what's wrong with me. Shell shock, they call it, though I was never shelled. Neurasthenia, combat fatigue. Different words for the same thing. You went to war and war followed you home, but they don't have a word for the worst part. The part where you survived and everyone else didn't. where you wake up every morning and have to remember that you're alive when better men are dead, where you carry all their faces with you, all their last moments, and you can't put them down. Peters died screaming. Thompson died falling. Ashworth died in my arms while I tried to hold his blood inside him. Harris died 4 days after I trained him. McLeod saved my life, and I never saw him again to say thank you. And I'm still here, still alive, still breathing. Why? I don't know. I've spent 36 years trying to understand it, and I'm no closer to an answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe survival is just chance, just luck, just being in the right place when the bullets miss, or the wrong place when they hit someone else instead. The war was supposed to end all wars. That's what they told us. All that death, all that suffering, it was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to make the world better. But I look at my son, he's 14 now, and I see them already preparing for the next one, already building the weapons, already choosing the enemies, already writing the songs that will convince another generation of boys to climb into their own baskets and wait to burn. And I can't stop it, can't warn them, because they won't listen. They never listen. They'll believe the same lies we believed, fall for the same promises, and die the same deaths. We were observers, up there in the balloons. We watched the war from above, saw the patterns, saw the waste, saw the truth that the men in the trenches couldn't see because they were too close to it. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. The war happened anyway. The men died anyway. And here we are, barely 20 years later, and I can feel it building again. From up in those balloons, you could see everything. Every trench, every shell hole, every dead man's land. You could see the whole terrible machine at work. But you couldn't stop it. You could only watch and call in coordinates and help it continue. That's what haunts me most. Not the fear, not the deaths, not even the survivors' guilt. It's knowing that I helped, that every coordinate I called in, every artillery strike I directed, every German position I identified, I helped feed the machine. I helped it kill more efficiently. They gave me a medal for that, a piece of ribbon and some metal. It's in a drawer somewhere. I haven't looked at it in years. Some men came back from the war and moved on with their lives, got jobs, raised families, put it behind them. I envy them. I don't know how they did it. I came back, but I never left. Part of me is still up there, will always be up there, suspended between earth and sky, swaying in the wind, watching the world burn and unable to look away. The war ended in 1918. For me, it never ended at all. That's the truth they don't tell you when you enlist. That's the cost they don't mention when they talk about glory and duty and sacrifice. You don't die in the war. You die after it, slowly, over years, piece by piece. And nobody notices because you're still walking around, still breathing, still pretending to be alive. But you're not. You're just a ghost, hanging in the sky, waiting for a bullet that already hit you decades ago. We never came back, none of us. We're all still up there.